Continuing on in my series about how to read machine learning research papers. So this time I want to read a research paper with you as if you have no point of reference at all. Maybe you're someone who's brand new to the field, or maybe you are somebody who's gotten this from a colleague and they've said, hey, check this out. I think it's relevant to our work. You open it up and you just go, I've never heard of any of this before. Happens a lot. That's why research is what's called bleeding edge, because sometimes it introduces concepts that you may not be familiar with. Sometimes they're old concepts. I'm going to introduce one that's actually an old concept. However, you may not have seen it before because it wasn't specifically relevant maybe to what you're working on. But now, with this research paper, it is. The other side you can come at is you are brand new to the field and you want to read machine learning research, and you can. However, you're going to have to do a little bit of work and research and background to understand some of the concepts that are being introduced. Why do you want to do this if you're brand new to the field? Because you can, with one research paper, learn more about machine learning than you can in a boot camp. It's crazy how much depth is in each one of these research papers, and you can follow a line of thought because the research paper lays it out so clearly. This is something that peer reviewers demand from research papers, is this clear line of thought and an evidentiary connection between a large body of prior work. And if you follow that rabbit hole, you can learn a lot very quickly about a particular piece, or more general, in this case, I'm going to introduce you to something pretty broad, part of machine learning. And that's awesome. And that's why when you're early in your stage, early on in your career, read research, because you'll be able to deep dive and you'll get so much more out of a research paper than you will out of a boot camp in some cases. So let's dive straight in to this paper right here. What matters for adversarial imitation learning? Now, you've just gotten sent this by a colleague, or you are brand new to the field, and you're probably looking at this like, what is adversarial imitation learning? Well, let's start right there. Adversarial imitation learning. You can do two things. You can Google it, but since you know it's a core concept, somewhere down here, they're going to introduce it. And that's the great thing about all machine learning research, is they'll introduce it someplace in the paper. They'll back it up, and it's right here. Adversarial imitation learning, and here's your link to find more information about it. It's a reference, and so you click on it in any PDF, and it's going to take you down to, okay, so I want to find generative adversarial imitation learning, or I can just Google this right here. Seriously, just right-click, Google search. There it is. Now I'm at the paper. This is a paper that will explain to me what generative adversarial imitation learning is. And that's something that you're going to find in a lot of research all research, is that they've got an evidentiary chain or a research chain for you to follow. Now, generative adversarial imitation learning, this paper is going to walk you through it. It's going to teach you about it. And you almost immediately, with a paper like this that describes some foundational model architecture or approach, math comes flying at you really fast. And if you're someone who's fairly new to the field, or even if you've been in the field for a while, I mean, some of this stuff can get obscure. You can forget. Believe me, we all do. So I want to make you comfortable with, we Google stuff, and that's okay. And if you are brand new, you can look at this and say, okay, section 3 will work with finite state and action spaces. Maybe you don't know what those are. If you're in your first year, you may not know finite state. So right-click, Google it. That's it. This one's kind of complicated because there's a company called Finite State. But there are also resources like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not 100% accurate all the time. However, if you go down the rabbit hole of looking at a Wikipedia article, you're going to, especially for basic concepts, you're going to get a good idea of what it is. And if you need to, you can follow it. You find finite state machine, finite state automation, okay, and you're going to understand it's a mathematical model, and I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but you understand this is where you want to go. Read it, you'll get a basic understanding of what it is. Now, action spaces. What if you don't understand action space? Same thing. Click, right-click, Google. action spaces, state observation. Okay, yes, states, observation, and action spaces in reinforcement. See, now you're starting to say, okay, so these are related concepts, and you can read about these concepts and get a deeper understanding of states, observations, action spaces, and so on. And you can, this is why I say it's great if you're just getting into the field to do this, because you can rabbit hole down this and you'll find out that things like finite state, action spaces, those are universal concepts in machine learning. So they're core foundations that you need to understand anyway. And through this paper, through this chain of research, you can walk straight down essentially a course about any particular area that the paper is going to cover and learn it front to back. And like I said, you have this guidebook. So just follow the guidebook and don't be afraid to Google stuff. A lot of explanations on core and foundational concepts are quite simple, and you can follow them and get to know them very, very well. So now we go and we start talking about high-dimensional continuous environments. I'm assuming you know what that is, even at a basic level. So now we have, okay, Greek symbol is the, and seriously, if you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. I forget what some of these capital and lowercase Greek symbols are all the time, and I forget what they represent, and it's cool. Just say Greek symbol. If you don't know what it is, just say Greek symbol. So Greek symbol is the set of all stationary stochastic policies that take actions in another Greek symbol, but we know this is action spaces. It's a larger set of action spaces or given states in, hey, we're referring back. And this is something that happens a lot when you see in research any sort of mathematically rigorous treatment or explanation. You're going to see almost every variable explained to you in a way that you can just Google the thing behind it. So if I have no idea what stationary stochastic policies, wow, easy for me to say, stationary stochastic policies, I'm going to Google it. And hey, we got a great answer. Policy does not change over time. And hey, look, we got that same Greek symbol. And you can read just really simply, understanding just the basic pieces of what this is. And you are following a line and learning. Like I said, you're learning a whole lot in a very short amount of time of relevant and clustered to this particular topic and to your adversarial, generative adversarial imitation learning paper. And so there you go. And you can, even if it's math, even this complex math, you can break down because you understand now they've told you what each one of these main variables and Greek symbols and symbology, because you got to remember, all math is instructions that you read and then you follow them and you get some sort of result. So what does that mean? Those equations are just representations of increasingly complex structures and transformations of some inputs to explain a system, a phenomenon, a whole lot of different higher and deeper level concepts. And so we have to use these symbols because if we tried to do any other way, it just wouldn't make sense. We couldn't put it in an equation anymore. So you'll see researchers explain exactly what goes into that math. And so you can Google it. And that's the awesome thing. That's how you Google math. You know, you could Google the equation, but it's far more informative for you to go through and look at each one of the variable and symbology definitions, higher level concept definitions, then just Google each one of them. And you'll start learning it's almost an ecosystem of terms and concepts that go into explaining each one of these mathematical formulas. And so that's how, if you run into a paper that you've no idea what the math behind it is, just follow the descriptions, because they're almost always, at least in well-written research papers, the peer reviewers say you must explain everything down to minutia. And so you'll be able to Google your way through the math and understand a lot of core concepts around data science and machine learning. Now we're back. You can go through and start reading this whole massive paper, or you can just read the abstract, the introduction. You've got most surprising findings, paper outline, and then you can go straight to the end and you're done. However, for a paper like this is presenting some interesting information about this core concept. And you can read this in the abstract, where they'll say adversarial imitation learning has become a popular framework for imitation and continuous control over the years. Several variations of its components were proposed to enhance the performance of the learned policies as well as the sample complexity of the algorithm. In practice, these choices are rarely tested altogether in rigorous empirical studies. It is therefore difficult to discuss and understand what choices among the higher-level algorithmic options as well as low-level implementation details matter. And so that's what they're saying. Here's the problem statement. That's what they're going to explain and hopefully explore and give you a foundational understanding of what's really going on. In one of my previous videos, I presented another paper that was very similar to this one. So these are papers that you are probably going to want to read in depth. And maybe one of the reasons why a colleague might have sent this to you is to help understand something that you may have been using under the covers and not really understood. And there are some implications of this paper to your work. That's a possible reason why you got sent this. And so to tackle this issue, we implement more than 50 of these choices in a generic adversarial imitation learning framework and investigate their impacts on a large-scale study over 500,000 trained agents with both synthetic and human-generated demonstrations. While many of our findings confirm common practices, some of them are surprising or even contradict prior work. Okay, so now that you see that there are novel findings, this didn't just confirm prior knowledge. This is finding something interesting. You'll want to scroll down and figure out, what did they find? What is interesting that they found? So here we go. This is what they found. This is what they found most interesting. That maybe contradicts what has been talked about previously. And so read through these. Is it interesting to you? While many of our findings confirm common practices in AI research, some of them are surprising or even contradict prior work. In particular, we find that standard regularizations for supervised learning, dropout, and weight decay often perform similarly to the regularizations defined specifically for adversarial learning like gradient, penalty. Moreover, for easier environments, which were often the only ones used in prior work, we find that it is possible to achieve excellent results without using any explicit discriminator regularization. So is that interesting to you? Is that a finding that's worth exploring more? If it is, great. If it isn't, okay, just skip it. And it's the same thing for your human demonstrations. And if that's the end of your paper reading, that's fine. Maybe neither one of those things were interesting to you. And your response may be, meh. Or if those are interesting and you want to read more details, you could read the experimental design if you were rigorously evaluating the validity of this paper, which I do applied research, so I would actually do that because, I mean, obviously Google Brain published this, so I can suspend some disbelief. Those are some really smart people. This is a well-respected lab. So are they probably right? Yeah, they probably are. However, for someone like me, I'm going to dive in, understand their experimental design, and really dig into what they did and say, okay, is this valid? Does this make sense? Do I find flaw in what they've done? Now, they've been peer-reviewed, so I'm probably not going to find flaw with what they've done. However, I'm going to do the due diligence. Are you going to do that as someone trying to break into the field, or as somebody who just got this sent to them by a colleague? No, you're not going to go into that level of depth. It's cool if you want to understand experimental design. This is a great, again, if you're learning and breaking into the field, this is a cool introduction to experimental design in machine learning, which is something most people do not understand. So is it worth reading even if you aren't doing it for the same reasons I am? Yeah, definitely. If this is something you want to learn, read through it. And again, follow the same process that I gave you earlier on, where if you run into something that doesn't make any sense, Google it and spend the time. In most cases, it'll take you 30 minutes per core concept. And so this paper may take you a few days to read if you're not familiar with end-to-end everything that's in it. However, by the time you're done reading this paper, realize, again, you've learned a significant amount, not just about the results in this paper, but about your machine learning body of knowledge foundational concepts. So could you read this? Yeah. Do you have to? Nah. Don't worry about it. Again, additional experimental design, analysis. It's worth reading the analysis. Always, always, always read the analysis. What matters for the agent train? Okay, here, summary of key findings. You looked above, you read the summary, you say, okay, I care about what they probably found. So now this is worth reading through. This is, again, a great description, and you're going to find that we've got figures all over the place. And if you're having trouble following some of the dense materials and you don't really care about the foundational piece that underlines what it is that they found or what it is that they did, again, you can follow the links, you can follow the resources that they provide and the sources that they cite, or you can gloss over it and look at the figures and just get the raw output, just get the raw findings. And in a lot of cases, reading the figures and the captions can give you a lot in a very short amount of time without a lot of complexity. So just read these. And again, this is sort of like peeling an onion. Read it, read the easiest part of it. If you don't care, you haven't invested a whole lot of time. If you do, then go back and figure out at what level of depth do you need to understand this. And it's really personal to you and your use case and your application. Again, if you're trying to learn, worth diving into it. When you get into really, really dense water, the earlier in your learning path you are, the less likely it is that you really want to go that deep. However, just knowing some of the concepts and definitions, it's going to help you because you're going to encounter these later on in your learning path. So at least Google it if you're unfamiliar with it. If it gets deep and dense, don't worry about going too deeply down the rabbit hole. And again, just walk through the paper, read the results by looking at the figures, checking out the captions, understanding what it is that they found, and then going back and reading more deeply if that's something you're interested in and care about. And that's really what you have to do with research papers, is the researcher has presented a wide body of results that you may not be interested in end to end. So make sure that you use your time effectively and you don't waste hours and hours and hours and get to the end of the paper. Because I used to do this 4 or 5 years ago. I would read everything. I would get to the end of the paper and it was like, man, do you have any understanding of how long I just wasted of my life? I'm looking in the mirror and I'm saying, you just wasted an hour of your life and you didn't really learn anything. So don't do that. Look at this with a rational eye and realize you don't have to understand everything end to end, and don't feel bad if you don't care about some of the results. You're not offending the people who publish the paper. They understand that this isn't universally applicable to everybody and that some people are going to care way more and be way more passionate about these results than other people. And so again, look through figures, then dive into what's important to you to understand. Now again, you got another great question. What matters for the discriminator training? Do you care about this? Yes. If so, read through, get to know what matters most. And I'm going to just kind of scroll through because I think you got the general idea of what you should be doing, what you should be reading on, and how best to skim through a paper like this and then decide what it is that you want to dive deeply into, and then how to get the background. Like I said, those citations, those sources that they'll cite, and there'll be little links. You click on it and then you Google the paper. Or when they explain math, just Google what description they give you for those particular terms and high-level concepts and dive in only as deeply as you need to in order to understand that paper. Or if you're just trying to learn, hey, dive in as deeply as you want to, as deeply as you are curious, and you'll get a lot out of one of these papers. Related work, sometimes, related work will help you more deeply understand this particular concept, and it's usually higher up. But related work can give you a deep dive. But more times than not, you can just skip over related work. Conclusions are usually a little meatier than this, but they gave you a whole lot of the conclusions and key findings above. A little different format for a paper, but that means that your conclusions are going to be less substantial. And, here you have your references, which you've talked about. Now, you notice this is a 69-page paper, and you're thinking, wait, it was done at page 12. What's all this other stuff? And this is your background. You can go deep, as in what I've been talking to you about in, those Google searches that you can do to understand concepts, or you can go deep into their research. Your peer reviewers will look at any given paper and say, I want you to go more in depth into this. And so you'll see addendums at the end and appendices and so on, where they will, to make peer reviewers happy, they will go deep. Do you need to read these? Not necessarily. Probably not. How would I put it that way? Probably not. If you want to dive deeply into this particular concept, definitely do it. If not, this is more information than you need. But the other reason you should always roll through these is because in many cases, they'll give you useful information or more of their results. They'll present a more rigorous description or findings of what it is, not only that they did experimentally, but also what the results were of their experiments. And in this case, as I scroll through, you're going to see that there are all of these charts. Remember, I said you can get a lot out of each one of these charts. You can get a lot of understanding visually, and some of us are visual learners. This is probably the easier way for you to interpret and understand the results, is just go through. So do you have to read the appendices? No, but definitely check them out and see if there's additional resources or additional presentations of the finding, and maybe more complete presentations that you may actually want to pull in and get better familiarity with in order for you to apply it to whatever job that you may be doing, or whatever model you're building, whatever use case you have. Might be worth scrolling through these. So no, don't feel like you have to read them, but definitely skim through them. You might get a little bit or a lot out of them. So that's how you read a research paper it's given to you cold, or maybe you're breaking into the field early stage in your learning path, and you want to use one of these papers to dive deep into a particular area of the field and get some good knowledge around it. And like I said, both of those are completely valid places to approach a paper. You don't have to read the whole thing. Only read what you're interested in. Don't be afraid to Google. We all do it. Google whatever you don't understand. Just know that the authors are going to walk you through it in as simple terminology as possible. They're going to give you the math. Maybe you're familiar with the symbology and the math behind it, so that's going to be easier for you to scan through. Maybe you're not, and they're going to describe each one of the core concepts of their equations and give you enough background that you can do some searching on your own and figure it all out. Some papers are going to take you 20 minutes to read through. Like this one, if you just skimmed through and did the abstract introduction, key findings, done. Maybe you looked at some of the figures, and that's all you cared about. You pulled enough information out that you now know the foundational concept that they were trying to support and better explain to you. That's completely valid. Don't be afraid to just scan a paper and get the core concepts from it. You may just need that level of information, and that's fine. Don't feel like you have to read the whole thing. So I hope you're a little less intimidated by lengthy papers and maybe some symbology in the math that you don't understand, or some concepts that are being introduced that you've never been exposed to. Don't let that stop you from reading a paper and getting all the benefits out of learning from this great resource and well-presented body of knowledge in one particular area of our field.